Hello, everyone. I'm Lila Rakosi, host of This Week in Texas History, a weekly show that is part of the Save Texas History program. Save Texas History is brought to you by Commissioner George P. Bush and the Texas General Land Office. If you love our state's history and want to make sure that it lasts forever, please visit savetexashistory.org, and we encourage you to make a tax-deductible donation. Today we have Rolando Garza as our guest. Rolando is the archaeologist and Chief of Resource Management at Palo Alto Battlefield National Historical Park in Brownsville. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in anthropology. In 1998, he joined the National Park Service and was recently awarded the prestigious John L. Cotter Award for Excellence in National Park Service Archaeology. Rolando, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
I'd like to start off by talking about your professional background and how you became interested in archaeology and more generally military history.
I guess my dad instilled a love of history in me. As a child, he was a pharmacist, but he was very involved in local and family history. And I guess I took that. When I was pursuing my bachelor's degree in anthropology, I'd switched majors quite a bit. I wasn't quite sure I was going to make a living with a degree in anthropology, but it worked out great. It was definitely a good fit for me doing archaeology and military battlefield archaeology. It was just, I first fell in love with archaeology with prehistoric resources, but most of my big paying jobs were doing 19th century archaeology. And then I got an internship here at Palo Alto Battlefield in the late 90s. And I met the three top NPS battlefield archaeologists, Doug Scott, Charles Hecker, and John Corneliuson. I would eventually go to work for John Corneliuson at the Southeast Archaeological Center, where I got to work on Revolutionary War battlefields, War of 1812 battlefields, and Civil War battlefields, which was a perfect training ground for me to come back to Palo Alto and eventually become the Chief of Resource Management.
So could you talk a little bit more about what a battlefield or a conflict archaeologist does? And that falls within historical archaeology. So could you talk a little bit as well about what role historical documents play? What are some of the challenges that a conflict archaeologist or a historical archaeologist would face?
As I said earlier, I first fell in love with archaeology for the prehistoric resources, but most of my jobs were in 19th century. And that is great because what separates prehistoric from historic here in the New World, which usually we look at pre-Columbian, is that they're written records, highly available. They're the historic document, which gives us so much more information. A lot of people like to refer to archaeologists as trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle of what the past looked like. With historic archaeology and the written record that's there, you have so many more pieces of the puzzle to get a more accurate image of what the past looked like. Now, battlefield archaeology is a lot different because usually battles take place in a short period of time. So the deposition in archaeology is pretty much the study of past human cultures based upon the material remains, what's left behind. So at living sites or home sites, you have years to decades to centuries of deposition. At a battlefield, you usually have an afternoon, like the case with Palo Alto or Saginaw La Palma. So that's kind of one of the big differences, the deposition of that. But you also have a wide range of stuff, what people consider conflict archaeology. I'm looking at pure battlefields here. There's also the siege sites, which can be prolonged battles that can take place over days, weeks, even to months. Or you can have massacre sites. Stuff like that is all kind of included under the study of conflict in archaeology.
I think it's fair to say that probably a lot of Texans don't realize how important the Rio Grande Valley is in terms of its military history, but also within its importance to American history and Texas history. Can you just paint a scene for us of why this area was so important in terms of the military actions that are going on there over the last couple of hundred years?
Actually, I remember growing up, I always felt like this place meant nothing. It was not of any importance to the rest of the United States. But as we found out over the past decade or so, it's the international boundary, the border of the Rio Grande River, where a lot of people have heard about and know about us. And that was the case back in the 19th century. Back when Texas claimed their independence, they claimed the Rio Grande River as their boundary, the southern boundary, which was disputed because in the old maps of Mexico during the colonial period and the Young Republic period, the southern boundary of Texas was always the Nueces River. And it was with the Treaty of Velasco that was signed after the Santa Anna was defeated at San Jacinto, that Texas claimed that boundary. And when they decided to become a state in the Union, President Polk guaranteed them that the Rio Grande River would be the southern boundary, which is why while these battles happened down here, while they were trying to come to peaceful terms with Mexico about the boundary, which was not happening, which was stalemating, President Polk sent General Zachary Taylor and half the U.S. Standing Army, which was only about 5,000 troops at the time, down to the Rio Grande River as a kind of an army of occupation, where they set up the earthen star-shaped fort, which would become known as Fort Brown. And it would serve as an active military installation up until World War II. And played an important role during the Civil War. I still believe it is today and even up to World War II because of this international boundary you're at and the port of Matamoros and port of Brownsville. No.
If we take a siege site like Fort Brown, what can historical documents or historical maps tell us about a siege that took place there? And how does it compare to the archaeology?
The maps are important. The documents are important. Maps are very important. What I forgot to add earlier when I was talking about the difference between prehistoric and historic archaeology is now we got a lot more pieces of the puzzle that we'd see. We have a clear picture. The problem is a lot of the written documentation, anything that's written has a little bit of a bias in it. Some are very biased, some aren't, some have hidden agendas in there. So you got to be careful. You definitely got to examine as much as you can and all the information. You really want to have a thorough literature review with that. But maps tend to be a little more objective, and you could really learn a lot from the period maps to just different features. We definitely know that the river has changed its course and extended. That landform has changed some. And some of the features, the Mexican gun emplacements that were just along the river are now on the U.S. side. So it helps guide you to look into that. The archaeology, like I said, is deposited. It's objective. It's up to the researcher to use methodology that will get that recorded, documented, because it could be misinterpreted, and you want to have good data collection so that after you're done, somebody else might get the data years later and be able to make sense of it and come to a more accurate interpretation of what took place.
What do you see as the biggest challenges facing battlefields today?
Preservation. The biggest challenge to battlefields and preserving battlefields and telling the story, because it's a very important. Down here, the battles, the national park here that's charged with preserving the opening battles of the U.S.-Mexican War, to me, I believe is doing a very important job, because what started on these fields would lead to events that would change the face of the North American continent and forge the relationship of these two young republics. And it's important that we're able to give that information to people, and it is much easier when they come out to the battlefield and see tangible resources like the ruins of the earthen fortification of Fort Brown. There's still parapet walls out there. The river's still just right there. It's a lot easier to reach and connect to the visitor when they have something like that, or when they have an open battlefield like Palo Alto, where they can imagine two 19th century armies standing there. But development encroaches and tear it down. Like during the 20th century, it was after the 1930s that we lost a good part of the fortification, and we aren't sure. I think it was due to levee construction that most of it was wiped out. But it's development, just like at the open field of Palo Alto. If, we can preserve that 3,400 acres that we got, but it's like we almost had a electric plant built, a gas burning electric generation plant built right across from the front gate. And those kind of stuff, the wind farms that are coming up, although they're green energy or whatever, it does impact on the view shed and the visitor experience. So it's development comes, but sometimes development wipes out battlefields that are not protected altogether yet. And so that's, to me, the biggest threat. And then also we got to reach out to the public, educate the importance. Why? Because, we're both archaeologists. We both understand what's the value in what we do, and we think, but a lot of people don't appreciate why it's important to preserve and understand history, which to me, the biggest part, it is because history, what happened in our past is what makes us who we are as a society today. And we got to realize that, that's why it's important.
So in your career, you've been fortunate enough to work on many important battlefields spanning several different wars all over the country. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I have favorites. Let me break them down by wars. Okay, so the Revolutionary War definitely has to be Kings Mountain, because we did the first archaeology out of SEAC, Southeast Archaeological Center. We did the first archaeology there. There was so much integrity to that battlefield record there. It was great. We really learned a lot, and it was just a fun project. For the War of 1812, I only worked 2 battlefields, which was Horseshoe Bend and Chalmette, or the Battle of New Orleans. And definitely the Battle of New Orleans, Chalmette was good, even though a lot of that battlefield is wiped off with industrial development. I think there's an aluminum plant that's occupying a good portion of it. But there was some integrity where we were at, and it really made the partnership that we carried on to Palo Alto. We worked with a NPS, National Park Service CRGIS team, and it just formed a relationship, and we were able to bring these guys down. They helped us on all 6 years at Palo Alto. And for the Civil War, it had to be Shiloh National Battlefield, just because, one, it's one of the first 5 battlefields that were protected since 1899, and the integrity is just, God, it's so impressive. And the amount of, just because it was a large battle with that, just there's so much material out there. There's just so much there. So much artifact density is great. And then for the U.S.-Mexican War, it's Palo Alto. It's definitely Palo Alto's my heart. It's there because it's really fortunate for a professional to be able to study one site for decades. So I'm fortunate. I'll be lost if I have to move and go back doing regular archaeology where you have to know a little bit about everything. Here I can concentrate on one period and really, really hone in my knowledge.
So let's talk about community outreach for a moment. You're very active in Brownsville and in the Rio Grande Valley. You organize, among other things, the Rio Grande Delta Archaeology Fair every October. You also run a living history program that teaches visitors about the U.S.-Mexico War. Can you just discuss a little bit about, well, tell us a little bit more about those 2 initiatives, but also what do you think visitors get out of initiatives like that?
It's important for us to kind of educate the public about what we're doing and what value it has to them and to our country and to the community. So it's fun, like the living history events. We get a replica cannon out there, and we don't fire a shot, but we fire a round, just a blank charge. And man, when you hear that boom, it gets everybody's attention. Sometimes it even makes babies cry, but it gets their attention. So you got them open and they're ready to hear what you have to say. And that's one of the big things. With the Archaeology Fair, we have a wide variety. This year we're scheduled for our 14th annual Archaeology Fair. Due to this COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to have it virtually. So what we'll do, me and Daniel Livada, the interpretive park ranger here, will be doing a live Facebook feed Saturday, October the 17th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we'll be introducing videos from various archaeologists or other aspects of historic preservation into our Facebook, and those videos will there for the public, and we'll have question and answer sessions. It's new, but we wanted that the show must go on, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We wanted to give the public something, because it is important. You got to continue to outreach. You can't reach enough people to get them to understand and have them support what we're doing, which is historic preservation.
To end our sessions, we like to ask our guests what inspires them about Texas history. So do you have a particular document or a historical artifact that really resonates with you or made an impact personally or professionally?
My family has been in northern Mexico, southern Texas since the 18th century. And kind of what I learned growing up and all that, then what I understand a lot better now. And I think that's what drives me is just, getting to a more accurate depiction of the past. It drives me. In Texas, I was gonna say, it's just like the state, the history big. It had big impacts. We're a very important part of this country, in my opinion. And the history we have needs to be kind of looked at objectively and try and give the most accurate depiction of our role in this country.
Rolando, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to thank Rolando Garza for spending time with us and talking about a fascinating subject in Texas history. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Riccozzi, for having me on again.
On behalf of Commissioner George P. Bush and the Texas General Land Office, thank you once again for joining us here. We'll be back next time with more This Week in Texas History.